Before takeaways and ready meals, there was real cooking. Casseroles, pies, and bubbling pots that fed a family on a budget. These were the dinners that filled the house with warmth and the table with memories. Here are 25 British dinners your nan used to make. Few dishes capture British comfort quite like shepherd's pie, made with minced lamb simmered in onion gravy and topped with creamy mashed potatoes. It was a dependable midweek favorite from the 1960s through the 1980s. Nans across Britain would fluff the mash with a fork, creating crisp golden ridges under the grill. It was a thrifty way to use leftover roast lamb, stretched with carrots or peas to feed a crowd. Served piping hot with brown sauce or pickled red cabbage, it was filling, affordable, and loved by generations. For many families, shepherd's pie meant home, the scent of gravy thickening on the hob, the clatter of plates, and the simple satisfaction of scraping the last crispy edge from the dish. Fish pie was the taste of Friday evenings in countless British homes. Using white fish like cod or haddock, sometimes from the freezer, sometimes from the fishmonger, it was bound together with a thick parsley or cheese sauce, then topped with mashed potato and baked until golden. It offered warmth, comfort, and a break from meat-heavy weeks. Frozen peas or buttered carrots often made a humble side, and the dish's bubbling edges signaled supper was ready. In the 1970s and 80s, as frozen food became the norm, bird's eye and Findus turned it into a freezer staple. But nothing beat Nan's version, rich, creamy, and served from a heavy Pyrex dish steaming on the table. It was hearty, homely, and unmistakably British. A meal that defined the phrase character building. Liver and onions appeared on countless 60s and 70s dinner tables, bringing with it both nourishment and debate. Lamb's or calf's liver, fried quickly with soft caramelized onions, was drowned in thick gravy and served beside mashed potatoes. It was packed with iron and thrift, a post-war habit that lingered well into the next decades. For some, it was comfort. The smell of onions sizzling in the pan meant dinner was on. For others, it was a dreaded weekly ritual, its strong aroma filling the kitchen long before the plates hit the table. Either way, liver and onions embodied an era when food was practical, hearty, and unapologetically plain. A true taste of Britain before picky eating took hold. In the 1970s, British cooks flirted with French sophistication, and chicken chasseur was the height of it. Meaning hunter's chicken, the dish mixed foreign flair with domestic practicality. Browned chicken pieces simmered in a sauce of tinned tomatoes, onions, mushrooms, and a splash of white wine, or sherry if you were feeling fancy. Cooked slowly in a Pyrex casserole, it filled the kitchen with a rich, herby aroma that felt both exotic and homely. Often served with boiled rice or mashed potato, it represented Britain's growing curiosity about continental cooking. Dishes that felt glamorous yet doable. For many nans, it was their showpiece meal, proudly made from a Women's Weekly or Stork recipe card. Chicken chasseur brought Parisian pretense to the suburban table, one Pyrex dish at a time. Steak and kidney pie was the taste of Sunday warmth, pub lunches, and family gatherings. A robust mix of diced beef, kidney, and onions slow-cooked in rich gravy, then sealed beneath a buttery short crust or sweet pastry lid. It was hearty, unmistakably savory, and built to satisfy hard-working appetites. In the 60s and 70s, it appeared everywhere, from high street bakeries to school canteens and Nan's own oven. The smell of it baking filled the house, signaling that the weekend had arrived. Served with mash and peas or chips and gravy, it brought the same comforting heaviness as a hug in a pie dish. For many, steak and kidney pie wasn't just dinner. It was tradition, resilience, and the flavor of home, one slice at a time. a dish that defined Scottish comfort. Mince and tatties was as straightforward as it was satisfying. Minced beef, browned with onions, simmered in thick gravy made from oxo cubes or bisto granules, and spooned over a mountain of mashed potatoes. It was everyday food, made with whatever was to hand, sometimes stretched with carrots or peas. In working-class homes of the 60s and 70s, it was the mid-week constant, hot, filling, and never fancy. The smell of mince bubbling on the stove was the scent of security. Each bite felt like warmth after a cold day, proof that the simplest ingredients could still fill a plate and a heart. In every Scottish kitchen, mince and tatties meant home. No recipe needed, just instinct and thrift. Before Britain embraced authentic Indian cuisine, there was Nan's chicken curry, a curious but beloved mix of 1970s optimism and culinary improvisation. Made with diced chicken, a tin of curry powder, chopped apple, onions, and a scattering of sultanas for sweetness, it was Britain's first homemade taste of the exotic. Often cooked in a heavy casserole dish, the sauce leaned more towards stew than spice, mellow and comforting rather than fiery. Served with clumpy boiled rice, or later Uncle Ben's long grain, it represented adventure without leaving the kitchen. The scent of curry powder lingered for days, and families felt modern for eating something foreign. Today it's gently mocked, but once it was revolutionary. The dinner that made ordinary households feel worldly, spoonful by spoonful. Corned beef hash made a triumphant return in the 1970s, fueled by thrift and nostalgia. With the economy tight and tinned goods still a cupboard staple, this one-pan dinner was both quick and comforting. Chopped corned beef, onions, and diced potatoes were fried together until crisp at the edges, often with a dash of Worcestershire sauce for depth. Some families cracked in an egg on top for a payday treat. It was humble food. No recipe cards, no pretense, just a frying pan and a tin opener. The smell of sizzling potatoes and beef carried through the house, reminding everyone of simpler times. It filled plates and bellies, proving that even the cheapest ingredients could taste like satisfaction when cooked with care. A dinner of its time, but still fondly remembered. Cottage pie was the British weeknight classic. Minced beef cooked with onions, carrots, and gravy, topped with mashed potatoes and browned to perfection. A cousin of shepherd's pie, it became a staple as lamb grew dearer and beef mince filled the gap. Housewives in the 1960s and 70s perfected it with a dash of Worcester sauce or ketchup for sweetness and a fork's worth of pattern across the mash. The result was golden, bubbling, and deeply comforting. Served with frozen peas or boiled cabbage, it felt like a full meal for little money. The first spoonful broke through crisp potato into rich, meaty filling, a reward for the day's work. Cottage pie wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. It was steady, satisfying, and proof that simple food could feel like love. Spam fritters were the crunchy, salty relic of rationing that somehow became a beloved staple in the 60s and 70s. Thick slices of tinned spam, dipped in batter and fried until golden, offered a cheap and hearty dinner when meat was still a luxury. Served with chips and baked beans, they were pub grub, chip shop fare, and school dinner nostalgia all at once. The smell of frying batter filled the house, promising satisfaction on a budget. Children loved their crisp edges. Adults remembered them from harder days. Even as fresh meat became more accessible, spam fritters lingered, a guilty pleasure of the working-class table. They were the perfect blend of economy and indulgence, each crunchy bite echoing the taste of survival turned comfort. Nothing said special occasion in the 70s, quite like chicken and mushroom vol au vents. Tiny towers of puff pastry filled with creamy, savory filling. They were as glamorous as it got in suburban Britain. What began as party buffet food soon made its way onto dinner plates. a little taste of French sophistication from a frozen juice roll packet or a women's weekly recipe. Chopped chicken, tinned mushrooms, and a white sauce made from condensed soup or cream were spooned into the flaky shells, sometimes served with salad or chips for a full meal. They looked fancy, tasted indulgent, and brought a touch of continental flair to ordinary tables. For many nans, they were proof you didn't need Paris, just puff pastry, patience, and pride in presentation. Sausage casserole was the cure for cold evenings and tight budgets alike. Fat pork sausages browned in a pan, then simmered in thick tomato gravy with onions, carrots, and sometimes a tin of baked beans or lentils. It was comfort without complication. In the 1970s, when one-pan meals became the rage, every nan had her own version, often improvised from whatever the pantry offered. The smell of sausages bubbling away filled the kitchen with warmth and promise. Served with mash or hunks of bread to mop up the sauce, it never needed a recipe, just instinct and appetite. Whether cooked in an enamel dish or a newfangled slow cooker, sausage casserole was proof that simple ingredients cooked slowly could taste like home. Lancashire hot pot was a dish that wore its history proudly. Originating in mill towns, it survived into the 60s and 70s as the ultimate one-dish wonder. Layers of lamb, onions, and potatoes baked slowly until tender and golden. The top potatoes crisped into a crunchy crust, while the ones beneath soaked up the meaty juices. Housewives let it cook while they worked or tended to children, knowing dinner would be waiting, hearty and hot. It was often served with red cabbage or pickled beetroot, sharp contrasts to the rich stew beneath. Every family had its version, passed down and tweaked over decades. Lancashire hot pot wasn't just a meal. It was a taste of tradition, thrift, and community, proof that the simplest ingredients could hold a nation's heart. A hangover from post-war. In Britain, boiled bacon and cabbage lingered through the 1960s as a staple of no-nonsense home cooking. A salted bacon joint simmered gently until tender, then served with heaps of boiled cabbage and a ladle of parsley sauce. It was simple, salty, and satisfying. A reminder of times when every scrap mattered. The smell filled the kitchen hours before supper, mingling with the steam on the windows. Families served it with mashed potatoes, mustard, or a pat of butter melting over the greens. Though some children turned up their noses, others loved its plain, homely comfort. As tastes modernized, it faded quietly from the weekly menu. But for those who remember, the flavor of boiled bacon meant thrift, warmth, and Nan's quiet mastery of the basics. Egg and chips was Britain's great equalizer, a meal as common in cafes as in kitchens. 2 eggs fried until the edges crisped, a pile of double-fried chips, and a sprinkle of salt and vinegar. No frills, no fuss, pure satisfaction. It was the Friday night fallback, the answer when money was short or time was tighter. In the 1960s and 70s, it appeared everywhere, from greasy spoons to pubs, often served with a slice of white bread for mopping. The sight of golden yolk spilling across crisp chips was a small joy after a long week. For many, it wasn't just cheap fare, but ritual comfort, eaten in front of the telly with ketchup on the side. Egg and chips proved that the simplest meals could also be the best. When the 1970s dinner party boom hit Britain, no dish felt more sophisticated than beef stroganoff, though the British style often owed more to creativity than Russia. Strips of beef, onions, and mushrooms swam in a creamy sauce usually made with tinned soup or sour cream if one was feeling posh. Served over rice or pasta, it was foreign, fancy, and utterly modern. The scent of mushrooms and sherry filled the air as guests sipped babycham or wine from a box. It was the kind of dish that made cooks feel worldly, even if the recipe came from a magazine clipping. For many, it marked a shift from survival cooking to aspiration. Beef stroganoff was Britain discovering flavor beyond gravy, rich, indulgent, and proudly 70s. By the 1980s, Britain had fallen for convenience, and chicken Kiev became its golden symbol. Breaded chicken breasts filled with garlic butter were the decade's culinary glamour, supermarket sophistication straight from the freezer. When baked, the buttery center would burst out, flooding the plate with garlicky richness. It was dinner party cheesy one moment, weeknight indulgence the next. Often served with peas, chips, or a token salad, it felt posh, yet easy. Marks and Spencer and Birdseye made it mainstream, while home cooks tried their own versions, sometimes with disastrous buttery explosions. Chicken Kiev captured the spirit of the era. A little luxury, a little mess, and a lot of flavor. The first cut through the crispy crust was pure 80s magic, fast, frugal, and filling. Savory mince on toast was every busy nan's secret weapon. Minced beef browned with onions, seasoned with gravy granules or oxo, and spooned generously over thick slices of toasted bread. When budgets were tight, this was dinner done right, hot, hearty, and ready in minutes. A handful of peas or a sprinkle of cheese turned it into something special. In the 70s and 80s, when convenience met creativity, this dish became a quiet staple of weeknight life. The gravy soaked into the toast's edges, creating that irresistible blend of crunch and softness. It wasn't fancy, but it was deeply satisfying. The kind of meal that disappeared before you'd finished pouring the tea. Tuna pasta bake arrived in the late 70s and 80s as Britain embraced. Tinned fish, pasta, and the miracle of condensed soup. A typical version mixed cooked pasta with a tin of tuna, sweet corn, and cream of mushroom soup, topped with grated cheese and baked until golden and bubbling. It was a one-dish wonder, cheap, cheerful, and child-approved. Mums loved its convenience, nans admired its thrift, and everyone loved the crispy top layer of melted cheddar. The smell drifting from the oven promised warmth and ease. Served straight from a Pyrex dish, it was the taste of modern comfort, a fusion of convenience and tradition, proof that even in the age of instant food, family dinners still came baked with love. The heart of the North sat beneath a pastry lid. Meat and potato pie was working-class fuel. Chunks of beef or minced meat simmered with onions and diced potatoes, then tucked into dense, flaky pastry and baked until golden. Each household had its own version, some rich and peppery, others plain and comforting. It was a dish that could feed a crowd on a budget, with lashings of thick gravy and a side of mushy peas. The smell alone could fill a street, drifting from chip shops and kitchen windows alike. For miners, mill workers, and lorry drivers, it was the taste of home, hearty, humble, and proud. A pie that didn't need dressing up, it just needed a fork, a drizzle of brown sauce, and a good appetite. By the 1970s, tinned soup was the home cook's secret weapon, and nothing showed it off better than chicken casserole. 1 can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, a packet of chicken pieces, a few carrots, and maybe a handful of frozen peas, all baked together until bubbling and thick. It was the definition of convenience, and the smell that drifted from the oven felt like modern magic. Housewives swapped recipes clipped from magazines, and Pyrex dishes became symbols of effortless comfort. Creamy, savory, and impossibly simple. This casserole was dinner innovation in a can, the bridge between post-war thrift and the new age of convenience. For many families, it wasn't just food, it was proof that supper could be easy and still taste like home. Monday night was for bubble and squeak, a dish born from Sunday's roast and Nan's refusal to waste a Leftover potatoes and cabbage were mashed together, patted into cakes, and fried until crisp and golden at the edges. The name came from the sounds it made in the pan, a comforting hiss and bubble that signaled supper was on its way. Often served with a fried egg or a bit of cold meat, it turned scraps into satisfaction. The smell of sizzling cabbage wasn't everyone's favorite, but the taste, crisp outside, soft within, was pure comfort. In homes where thrift was a virtue, bubble and squeak wasn't just economical. It was tradition, proof that nothing went to waste and every meal could have a second life. Steak Diane was the 1970s dinner party drama, cooked with flair and a splash of brandy fire. Thin medallions. Steak was fried, then doused in a rich sauce of butter, cream, mustard, and Worcestershire sauce. Finished tableside with a flambe that made guests gasp. It was showmanship on a plate, part French fantasy, part suburban glamour. Served with sautéed mushrooms and perhaps chips masquerading as pommes frites, it made ordinary homes feel like Mayfair restaurants. The sauce clung luxuriously to the meat, and the smell of brandy and cream filled the room like perfume. For Nans who'd lived through rationing, Steak Diane was proof that Britain could finally indulge. Elegant, bold, and just a little over the top, it was the taste of a country rediscovering pleasure. Before the supermarket rotisserie, there was Sunday's centerpiece, the roast chicken dinner. Golden-skinned, stuffed with sage and onion, and surrounded by crispy roast potatoes, it was the meal that united families each week. Cabbage or carrots boiled soft, a ladle of thick gravy, and perhaps a spoon of bread sauce completed the ritual. In the 1960s, chicken shifted from luxury to staple as prices dropped, and it quickly claimed the Sunday spotlight. The smell of it roasting filled every corner of the house, drawing everyone to the table long before the plates were set. It wasn't just a meal. It was ceremony, comfort, and connection. When the carving knife sliced through that crisp skin, it marked the week's one guaranteed moment of togetherness. The undisputed monarch of British dinners, the Sunday roast was less a meal and more a national ritual. Topside or silverside beef, roasted slowly until tender. Carved thick beside golden roast potatoes and towering Yorkshire puddings. The gravy was dark, glossy, and made from the precious drippings. Vegetables, carrots, cabbage, or sprouts, were boiled within an inch of their lives, but forgiven for their place on the plate. Served with horseradish, mint sauce, or mustard, it was the taste of family, faith, and full bellies. The table filled with chatter, the clatter of carving knives, and the warmth of something timeless. Every bite spoke of care and continuity, the meal that closed the week and opened the heart. The full Sunday roast wasn't just food, it was Britain itself, served with gravy.